Passing the airport, the pilots descend below the minimum safe altitude of 5,000 feet. As they turn back towards the runway, they suddenly lose sight of the runway lights.
You go into the dark, and then you completely miss your references.
The pilots don't realize that a hill is blocking their view because the hill isn't on their chart.
Losing the visual sight of the airport would cause the pilots to look even further and lose more altitude.
Before they even know they're in danger, it's too late. As they begin their descent with no tower to guide them, Captain Gatke's radio communications are critical.
King Air 1127.
Delta's taxiing out. Takeoff on runway 4. They're using 4.
A King Air A90, a much smaller twin turboprop, is taxiing out to runway 4.
King Air 1127, Delta holding short of runway 4. Be to take in the runway for departure.
The commuter plane is now 90 seconds to touchdown.
500.
The King Air is in position and holding.
On short final for runway 13.
400.
The aircraft gonna hold in position on runway 4, or you guys gonna take off?
7646 Juliet, holding for departure on runway 4.
200.
Yeah, King Air.
Okay, we'll get through your intersection in just a second, sir.
100.
We appreciate that. Finals are complete.
At the same moment, flight instructor Paul Walker is in a hangar at Quincy Airport.
Max reverse. Oh, Christ.
We heard this explosion that rattled the walls and windows shook, and as I came outside, what I saw looked like a mushroom cloud from when you see the films of the atomic bombs going off.
At Quincy Airport, Paul Walker rushes toward burning wreckage on the runway.
I would say I was at the crash site in less than a minute and a half.
As he draws closer to the fire, Walker makes a bone-chilling discovery. It's not only the King Air engulfed in flames. 2 planes are on fire.
Open the door! Please! Someone help! Open the door! Open the door!
Another pilot comes to help Walker on the runway. The main exit, an air stair door, is directly behind the cockpit.
I grabbed the handle and attempted to open the door. I tried everything I could do in the world, and I could not get that door to unlatched.
I can't do this! I'm gonna get help!
Leaving the airplane was one of the more difficult things I've ever done in my life. When I looked at the captain, there was part of me that knows that she knew that by the time I got back, it would be too late. That I was literally their last hope.
Moments later, all hope for the crash survivors is lost.
It was easily less than 2 minutes from the time I was standing by the left wing till it exploded. I felt like I failed.
Despite Paul Walker's heroic efforts, 4 pilots and 10 passengers are dead. It's one of the worst runway accidents in North American history. 14 people are dead after a fiery crash. NTSB investigators are under the gun. Nora Marshall is an expert in crash survival factors. Why no one escaped Flight 5925 is a puzzle she wants to solve.
The thing that stands out in my mind is that these people had a chance, if the exits had opened, to survive.
The air stair door now becomes the focus of Marshall's investigation.
Yeah, I'm 100% sure that's it.
As the first person to reach the door, Paul Walker's testimony is key. He's certain he found the handle in the 6 o'clock or open position.
Finding the handle in the 6 o'clock position suggested to me that the first officer had moved the handle to the open position.
It's the first officer's responsibility to open the exit doors.
Someone help!
Emergency procedures call for the captain to shut down the airplane while the evacuation is underway.
I can't get it open! Open the door!
Had the air stair door opened right away, it may have allowed everybody off the airplane.
12 lives might have been saved if only the door had opened.
To know that they survived an accident and weren't able to get out is hard. It's very hard.
So with a handle like this, the door should open.
The focus now shifts to the mechanics of the door itself. Fire in the cabin severely damaged the door frame, but the main components have all been recovered.
Okay, let's see what this can tell us.
The locking mechanism is simple, with 3 cam locks on each side. A single cable connects the door handle to the cams. When the handle turns, the cable rotates all the cams to lock or unlock the door.
The cams have to rotate about 150 degrees from the locked position for the door to be open. We found that the cams were all either locked or partially locked.
What could have prevented them from unlocking?
What have we here?
Marshall discovers the locking cable is fractured. This could be the smoking gun she's been looking for.
With the cable having been snapped, you would want to understand that, because if it was not intact, it wasn't going to rotate the cams.
But confirming the theory requires more analysis. If she can prove that the cable snapped on impact, Marshall will have solved the mystery of the jammed door that cost 12 people their lives.
I can't get it open!
Lab tests on the cable that locks and unlocks the main door are a disappointment. The critical component did not break on impact.
The cable had broken, and the metallurgist determined that that was a result of heat and stress from the post-crash fire.
Okay, hang on!
In other words, the critical cable didn't break until after the fire killed everyone on board. What jammed the door is still a mystery. Asiana Flight 214 is nearing the end of an overnight flight from Seoul, Korea to San Francisco. Ben Levy is a frequent flyer returning home.
I fly pretty often for business or visiting my family. I'm originally from France, and so, I fly long distance a lot. I fly in and out of SFO a lot. So I know the airport very well.
Many of the other 291 passengers are Chinese, including a group of teenagers on their way to summer camp in the United States.
Asiana 214 Heavy, runway 28 left, cleared to land.
Landing checklist complete. Clear to land. On glide path.
The pilots check a set of lights beside the runway that can help guide them to a safe landing.
Check.
The plane is less than a minute from the runway when Ben Levy realizes something is wrong.
I remember noticing that there's a small pier that extends out of the runway, and I'm like, wow, we're very low. And I dismissed the thought, thinking, well, what can go wrong? There's all the technology on board to make sure that those guys don't mess up.
In the cockpit,
Speed!
a crisis hits.
I've got control. Oh, God! Go around!
The captain pulls up the nose and tries to climb. impact has torn the tail off the body of the plane. An engine is burning. If fire spreads to the fuel tanks, the plane could explode.
Let's see if we can open this door.
But getting down to the ground will not be easy.
I'm expecting at that point to see a slide open, right? The whole like, hey, you open the door, the slide is gonna open, and there's no slide.
Whoa. Okay. Help each other. Come on.
Luckily, some crumpled pieces of the fuselage have formed a makeshift set of stairs. Ben Levy stays by the door to help the other passengers climb down.
Come on.
At San Francisco International Airport, runway 28L is a disaster zone. Fire crews battle to keep flames from consuming the fuselage of Asiana Flight 214. With rescuers now on board to help the injured, Ben Levy finally heads to safety. Investigators search for a lead in the crash of Asiana 214. Air traffic controllers provide some answers.
Visibility was 10 miles, a few clouds, not an issue.
Controllers tell investigators that it was a normal day, except for the fact that some runway equipment was not in operation.
And that runway's glide slope was out of service.
Electronic equipment installed on runways can send signals to a plane's autopilot. The signals can help guide the plane down at a precise angle. But the main runway at the airport is under construction, and the equipment is switched off. It's a revealing discovery. A combination of high traffic and compact runways have earned San Francisco Airport a reputation for difficult landings. To manage the high traffic, controllers often ask pilots to come in fast and steep, leaving lower altitudes open for departing planes to climb out.
Very often we are given what we call the slam dunk approach, where we're high and we have to get down quickly, and it does create a little bit of a challenge.
All right, so there's San Francisco Airport. Palo Alto's down here, you know.
Roger Cox knows firsthand how challenging landing at San Francisco Airport can be.
I can say from my own personal experience flying there many, many times that it's very easy to get high and hot, and you have to really stay on top of the airplane.
Asiana 214 Heavy, runway 28 left, cleared to land.
It all leads to some troubling questions. Were the Asiana pilots flying into danger? Did they face an extraordinary risk at an airport notorious for difficult landings?
So he'd be coming in from this direction, straight across the bay.
Roger Cox studies airport radar records. He wants to know if controllers assigned Asiana Flight 214 an approach that was too fast and steep to fly safely.
Clear to land.
There were some complaints initially from the operator that this crew was being asked to do something was unreasonable. So we wanted to spend quite a bit of time looking at whether that was true.
Same instructions, same approach. No one else had a problem.
Airport records reveal controllers gave two other planes the same instructions just before Asiana touched down. Both landed safely.
You can't fault the controller.
And they managed to land 777s safely without any difficulty. So although it is a somewhat challenging environment, we found that nothing that ATC did really caused the accident.
It's another dead end. For now, what brought down Asiana 214 remains a mystery. It's a quiet Sunday evening at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport.
Everybody ready for takeoff?
It's all looking good.
An El Al cargo jet is fueled and ready to depart for Tel Aviv. The freighter's 4 massive Pratt & Whitney engines pump out 200,000 pounds of thrust.
LL 1862, climb flight level 210.
Flight level 210, roger.
The controller clears them for a climb to 21,000 feet. Everything seems normal for the first 7 minutes of flight.
What the hell?
The 747 is rolling violently to the right.
Wow.
Both engines on the right wing have suddenly died.
Speedbird 943, climb flight level 280.
At Schiphol Air Traffic Control, the evening routine is about to be shattered.
LL 1862. Mayday, mayday, we have an emergency.
LL 1862, do you wish to return to Schiphol?
Affirmative. Mayday, mayday, mayday.
Turn right, heading 260.
The crew now has a heading back to the airport. But with hydraulics failing, the captain is having more and more difficulty controlling the plane. Flight 1862 is less than 3 minutes from landing. The plane is once again rolling to the right, and this time it's worse.
LL, further right, heading 310. Heading 310.
Controllers urge the pilots to correct their course to the runway.
I can't hold it! I can't hold it!
We have a controlling problem.
No, no, no! Come on!
Going down! Going down, 1862 going down. Going down.
Come on!
LL 1862 has slammed into an 11-story apartment block. The Bielmermeer apartment complex, home to thousands of people, is engulfed in flames. The next morning, daylight reveals the overwhelming scale of the disaster. The plummeting jet has cut the apartment block completely in two. There's almost nothing left of the plane. No one aboard has survived.
Dig in, guys! We need those black boxes!
Robert Benson is a veteran investigator with the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board. He knows the team and knows just how crucial the voice and data recorders can be.
We use those extensively, along with examination of wreckage, to nail down almost to an nth degree what happened sometimes.
Investigators face a difficult search through a tangled mess of pulverized aircraft parts and building debris.
Hang on. That's an engine part. Goes over there.
While investigators sort through the mountains of debris, witness reports provide a stunning lead.
The earliest information that I think the investigators had, which gave them clues that there was more to this crash than just the pilots losing power on two engines, was that witnesses saw things happening to the airplane and they reported this.
Just minutes before the crash, they saw what looked like two jet engines falling into Lake Hoymere, east of the airport.
Two engines in this lake. Let's find them, please.
Two engines were missing, and that became the focus of the investigation.
Divers immediately take to the water in search of the fallen debris. What they find could solve this mystery. Within hours, the search of Lake Hoymere pays off. Investigators recover one of Flight 1862's right side engines. A look at the serial number reveals it's engine number 4. The 747's engines are numbered from left to right. Number 4 is the outermost engine on the right wing. Searchers also recover debris from the forward edge of the right wing, control surfaces that are crucial for controlling the plane.
We've got...
The loss of leading-edge components, flaps and slats, led us to believe that the aircraft was extremely difficult to fly safely.
The mystery now is what caused the engines to fall off. Was it terrorism, a mechanical failure, or something else? Investigators rushed the recovered wreckage to a forensic lab and tested for explosive residue.
You have to look at every single part to either rule it in or out.
But there's no evidence of any explosion.
We looked at every single part and ruled out a missile.
One thing is now certain. The El Al disaster has nothing to do with terrorism. But with Engine 3 still missing, the case is far from being solved. It's early morning on the Indonesian island of Java. A Boeing 737 flies high overhead. The crew of Garuda Flight 200 is getting ready to land. There are 133 passengers in the cabin. They're nearing the end of a short flight from the Indonesian capital of Jakarta, 265 miles southeast of the city of Yogyakarta. Kyle Quinlan is also headed to Yogyakarta. He's an Air Force security officer.
I was working for 34 VLP Squadron. They're the guys who look after security for Prime Minister, the heads of government and stuff like that. We had to travel internally on civilian aircraft.
The plane is less than 15 miles from the airport.
Whoa, strong wind.
They hit some slight turbulence.
Garuda 200, you're clear to approach runway 09er. Let me know when you have the runway in sight.
Copy that.
The bumpy ride doesn't alarm the experienced captain.
Flaps 1.
He continues with a landing approach.
Flaps 1.
And calls for the flaps to be extended. Flaps increase the wing's surface area, adding the crucial extra lift needed at slower speeds. As the plane descends, Quinlan begins to feel uneasy. His Air Force training tells him something's not right.
When you travel on aircraft so frequent, you become aware of your surroundings, and for me it was when we were standing and looking out the window and thinking, we're not supposed to be at this height for how fast we were going.
Something's off, man. Clear to land, 2 miles out.
Quinlan can't shake the feeling the plane's dropping too fast.
What can you do? You're stuck here, you know, like there's nothing that you can do except for tighten up the seatbelt and just hang on and just ride this out, and hopefully we make it, you know.
Whoa, go around, Captain, go around.
We landed and we bounced.
It's chaos as the plane bounces a second time.
And I just remember thinking, just hang on, like, hang on.
Then a third impact, and the plane isn't stopping.
We're scraping on the belly. I can hear the wings, the engines, everything.
Many passengers are badly injured, and the fire is spreading fast. Kyle Quinlan realizes there's no time to wait for rescue.
Once we pulled up, I could still operate, and to see so many people who were busted up and couldn't do anything, I needed to do something and help these people out.
Investigators search for clues to explain why Garuda Flight 200 crashed. Was the plane configured properly? Perhaps there was something wrong with the wing flaps pilots rely on for landing.
The flap system on a modern jetliner like a 737 create greater lift. And that means that we can approach an airport or we can take off from an airport with a much lower and safer airspeed.
The team scrutinizes the mechanical rods or screw jacks that move the flaps.
We needed to look at the flap setting. What flap setting can we establish from the wreckage? We measured the screw jack extension to establish what the flap setting was.
What they find is astonishing.
Doesn't look like the flaps are all the way out.
The screw jacks show a flap setting of just 5 degrees, not nearly enough for a safe landing.
We just could not believe that the aircraft would have landed with only 5 degrees.
To provide enough lift on landing, the flaps of a 737 are usually extended step by step from 0 all the way to 40 degrees as the plane slows and descends towards the runway.
It's hard to overstate the value of the flap systems on a modern jetliner.
Investigators aren't sure how the flaps ended up at only 5 degrees. The flap mechanism was damaged in the crash and may have moved on impact. To be certain of how the flaps were set, they need to know what's on the flight recorders.
We need that data from the black boxes.
Some of that data is proving elusive. Australian technicians have been unable to download the cockpit voice recording. It's a huge blow. Desperate to hear what's on the device, investigators send it to the U.S. manufacturer, hoping experts there can recover the recording.
So steps were taken to hand carry the recorder to the factory so that the data could be downloaded.
Crash investigators are having better luck with a second black box, the flight data recorder. They've managed to download all of its stored information.
We were able to get information about the flap settings, the speed on the approach, the thrust reverser deployment, the dynamics of the approach and landing itself.
The data reveals the 737 was coming in for its landing blazingly fast. Flight 200 hit the ground at over 250 miles an hour, more than 100 miles an hour faster than normal.
We're not stopping!
This is a ridiculous amount of speed to approach an airport with the intent of landing.
The plane's speed at impact is so fast, it bounces twice before skidding into the rice field.
The speed of the aircraft on short final and on touchdown is so excessive, there was no way it was going to stop.
But why did the pilots touch down on the runway at such a catastrophically high speed?
Pull up the data for the flaps, would you please? There. The flaps were set for 5 degrees. Never more than 5 degrees.
The data confirms what the screw jack suggested to investigators. The flaps on Flight 200's wings were in a bizarre position, one that is never used during landing. UPS-6 has crashed into a military base 10 miles from Dubai International Airport. Neither pilot has survived. It's one of Dubai's worst ever aviation disasters. Beyond the outer edge of the wreckage field, investigators make an unexpected find.
We looked outside the burned area and saw this little shrub, maybe 3 feet high, just sitting out by itself in the dirt, burned, far away from the main area. Inside that bush was one small lithium battery that had burned blown itself up and shot out of the wreckage into the little bush.
The small piece of evidence suggests a terrifying new theory. The cargo manifest reveals UPS-6 had dozens of shipments of lithium batteries or consumer electronics that contained them.
81,000 batteries. That's a lot of hazardous cargo.
Once we'd got the cargo manifest and seen the total volume of these batteries that were on board, we were heading in the right direction.
Lithium batteries are extremely flammable. They can provide up to 10 times the energy of regular alkaline batteries, which is why they last longer in electronics. But their volatile chemical composition means they can burst into flames if they're damaged. Is that what happened in the cargo hold of UPS Flight 6? Joseph Panahiatou is a fire and explosive expert for the NTSB.
There's been instances where they're trying to load a pallet of cargo which contains a lot of batteries and it catches on fire at the airport before getting onto the airplane. So we're aware that that is a possibility. You can't automatically conclude that that's what it is, but it's one of the prime suspects.
Demand for lithium batteries has never been higher. Several billion are manufactured and shipped around the world every year.
Lithium batteries are on everything that we do. They're in our cars, they're in our homes, they're in every airplane we get on, they are everywhere.
At a testing facility in the United States, Straker runs lab tests to explore just how flammable lithium batteries can be. The results are astonishing. When they heat a single box containing 100 batteries, it quickly ignites, sending up flames that reach temperatures of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
We were completely surprised at how a small AA-sized lithium battery would overheat and then vent and practically just explode into a problem which you couldn't contain.
The black box flight data of UPS-6 has been downloaded. Investigators study each parameter, trying to reconstruct how the plane broke down over time. The next step is to map the failures and use them to trace the path of the fire. The data paints a vivid picture of an intense fire that burned through the cargo hold at a critical location.
All the failures are right here, behind the cockpit.
So what was in the containers beneath those systems?
Bingo. Lithium batteries.
In the crowded cargo deck, the flames soon spread to other containers, many of which also contained batteries.
Fire, main deck forward.
By the time the crew gets a warning, the fire is already burning too intensely for the suppression system to put it out. The manual flight control system is in the direct path of the fire. Luckily, the autopilot system is not. It can still send electrical signals directly to the servos that operate the plane's controls. But when the pilot switches off the autopilot, the plane becomes nearly impossible to fly.
I have no pitch control of the airplane.
Fire quickly destroys more systems, including the captain's oxygen supply and the landing gear controls.
I have no gear.
But Straker believes the tragedy would have been even worse if not for the final actions of the first officer.
300 feet, any runway is available.
At the last moment, in a plane he could barely control,
If able, climb immediately. Climb immediately!
he manages to narrowly avoid a suburb of Dubai. Investigators have one final question. The 747's cargo area is equipped with a flame-resistant liner. It wraps the entire cargo hold in a protective shield. It should have protected the critical systems. Investigators need to know why the cargo liner failed. It's now certain that an intense fire fueled by a large cargo of batteries crippled UPS Flight 6. To find out how fire could have burned through the plane's protective cargo liner, investigators conduct another dramatic test. The cargo liner failed. The flames spread quickly, eating through vital control systems. The final report highlights the need for better smoke detectors and fire extinguishers in cargo holds. It also calls for new fire-resistant cargo containers. At UPS, the entire company mourned the loss of their colleagues. Even before the report came out, they took steps to keep their pilots safer. The company is testing a new cargo container that can withstand a 1,200-degree fire for up to 4 hours. UPS has also improved safety in the cockpit. The new system creates a sealed air bubble for the pilots that allows them to see both their instruments and the view ahead if the cockpit ever fills with smoke. Sao Paulo, Brazil is the largest city in South America. With 16 million residents, morning rush hour is always a crawl. The traffic overhead is busy too. Residential neighborhoods are packed tight around Congonhas Airport, one of Brazil's busiest hubs. Every day, more than 500 flights come and go from this airport. Today, 89 passengers are getting ready for a short hop from Sao Paulo to Rio de Janeiro. They're flying on TAM Airlines. The Brazilian company has just won an award for Best Regional Carrier and wants everyone to know it.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Great.
One of TAM's most experienced pilots is in command. Jose Antonio Moreno has almost 6,500 flight hours.
Before start checklist?
Yes, Captain. Already done?
Good. Go ahead and call the tower so we can get these engines started.
You got it.
First Officer Ricardo Luis Gomez is less experienced. The 27-year-old has only been qualified to fly the Fokker 100 for 1 week.
Sao Paulo, TAM 402, we're ready to go and requesting engine start.
TAM 402, you're clear to start.
Fire them up.
Starting number 1. Starting engine 2.
The short-haul jet is powered by twin Rolls-Royce engines. Flight 402 is underway.
V1, rotate.
It seems like a routine takeoff.
No.
Then, less than 50 feet in the air, the plane rolls dangerously right. The captain needs to level the plane fast. The captain's efforts start to pay off. The wings move back towards level.
What was that?
It's a brief reprieve. The airspeed is dropping dangerously low. Worse, the captain can't keep the plane level.
It has to be an absolutely sick feeling for that flight crew at that point.
It's been 3 days since TAM Flight 402 crashed on takeoff. Now, with the help of black box data, investigators may soon know why. The flight recorder has captured dozens of parameters about the Fokker 100 short flight.
No.
But will it be enough to tell them why the plane rolled so suddenly out of control? As they study the data, investigators immediately notice something unusual.
Look at engine number 2. The power's all over the place. Can you bring up all the data on the thrust reversers?
There's another parameter investigators are eager to see.
Okay, so you saw something moving at the back of the engine.
A witness told investigators he saw one of the plane's thrust reversers operating just before the crash. Thrust reversers are buckets deployed on landing to redirect the flow of engine exhaust, pushing it forward to help the plane slow down. Pilots never use them in the air. If a thrust reverser did somehow deploy in flight, it could easily cause the type of steep right roll that doomed Flight 402. For investigators, witness accounts aren't enough. They need hard evidence. They soon find it in the flight data.
There.
Just after takeoff, the right thrust reverser moves back and forth twice and then stays in the dangerous deployed position.
This shouldn't even be possible.
Investigators test the actuators that move the reversers, looking for a failure that might explain why one of them opened during flight. But there's no sign of any malfunction. They also test the electronics that detect when the plane's wheels are safely on the ground. They need to check every circuit. The exhaustive effort pays off with the discovery of a faulty sensor. It was failing intermittently, signaling the reverser to open and close. The result was chaos in the cockpit.
The sensor failure was intermittent. So, the buckets opened and closed and opened again.
But there's one big problem with what investigators have uncovered. The Fokker 100 has an additional safety net that should have kept the plane safe even after the sensor failed. If a faulty thrust reverser deploys on takeoff, power to the affected engine is supposed to drop to idle automatically to prevent the reverser from acting as a brake. No alarm sounds in the cockpit, but the safety system kicks in immediately. The pilots don't have to do a thing. The Fokker 100 has more than enough power to climb safely on just one engine. So the question remains, why didn't Flight 402 make it safely away from Congonhas? After being delayed for more than an hour, Spanair Flight 5022 is finally getting back underway. There are 166 passengers on board, many of them looking to escape the stifling heat of Madrid in August.
Everyone was full of anticipation. Everyone wanted to be on their way.
Anna Stefanidis has come to Spain from Sweden. She is on her way to the Canary Islands to meet some friends.
Most of Europe has holidays, different summer holidays in August. I was going to Gran Canaria to meet my girlfriends. We were going to have 1 week's holiday. 4 ladies.
Spanair 5022, Joe Nixon 9 on runway 36 left.
Okay, here we go.
At 2:23, the MD-82 aircraft starts speeding down the runway. The captain watches their speed. They can't lift off until they reach 157 knots, takeoff speed.
V1, rotate.
tells the pilots something is going wrong.
Engine failure?
The first officer increases power, but he's losing control of the plane.
How the hell do you turn off that warning?
The plane is less than 40 feet from the ground.
I managed to think, this is my last trip. I've had a good life. I thought, now I die.
Fly the plane. Fly it.
Oh, God.
Just seconds after takeoff, Flight 5022 slams into a riverbank beside the runway. The plane, with 172 people on board, is now shattered wreckage spread over half a mile. Investigators into the crash of Spanair Flight 5022 immediately focused their efforts on recovering the plane's 2 black boxes, or flight recorders. Once they download the data, it could provide vital clues about what went wrong. At the crash site, marks on the ground paint a vivid picture,
Here's our first impact.
revealing just how quickly Flight 5022 turned to disaster. The first impact marks are just 200 feet from the runway. The plane then passed over a road and slid another 1,800 feet before crashing on the far side of a river. The timing immediately suggests a theory that might explain the crash.
Let's take a look at this engine.
Engine power is especially crucial during the first few moments of flight. If the plane doesn't have enough power, it won't achieve the speed it needs to overcome drag and get airborne. Investigators study the engines, searching for any sign of malfunction. Both are filled with debris, mud and grass ingested during the crash. The finding means the engines were spinning at high speed when they hit the ground. It was an engine failure that doomed the plane.
Right. The engines were fine. But something stopped that plane from climbing.
Investigators need a new theory to explain why the MD-82 couldn't climb.
What was it? I want maintenance records, weather reports, pilot records, the works. Let's get to work, people.
Okay, let's see what the numbers tell us.
Investigators know that for any takeoff, the plane's weight and balance must be carefully calculated. They review the passenger manifest, cargo, and fuel load. They need to check the total weight as well as where the loads were carried to see if the plane's center of gravity shifted dangerously forward or back. But it's soon clear this isn't the smoking gun they're looking for.
Well, there's nothing wrong with their takeoff weight.
Controllers in the tower provide a more promising lead. They tell investigators that the Spanair crew called off an earlier takeoff.
They had some kind of maintenance issue right before takeoff.
The plane was at the threshold of the runway when the pilots noticed a temperature gauge was giving them faulty readings.
Madrid, Spanair 5022. We have a slight problem.
We have to exit the runway.
5022, taxi to Apron Tango 2, Stand Romeo 11.
Controllers cleared the MD-82 to return to the terminal. Could the last-minute repair be the key to explaining the crash of Flight 5022? Investigators need to know. Atlantic Southeast Airlines Flight 2311 cruises at 15,000 feet.
It's the Braves' year. I feel it.
Sorry, I don't want to get my hopes up. Last year, still hurts.
At the controls is Captain Mark Friedlein. The 34-year-old is an experienced pilot with almost 12,000 flight hours. The flight attendant prepares the cabin for landing.
Runway's in sight.
The crew is just 5 minutes from touching down.
ASA 2311, cleared direct to Jeff 1. Linco, report the airport in sight. Expect a visual.
We do have it in sight, 2311.
Slowing for approach speed.
The aircraft was normal. There was nothing unexpected.
Gear down.
Gear down. 3 green.
Then, the captain notices an unusual sound.
It's weird. Number 1 seems to be spinning faster. The left is pulling a bit more. Bringing power down to the left.
Captain Friedlein tries to compensate for the plane's unexplained pull to the left. Flight 2311 is less than 1,000 feet from the ground, and the plane is getting more and more difficult to control.
What's going on? Can you see anything?
There's nothing.
What's going on with this thing? I can't hold it.
Get out of it!
Can't. Come on!
The plane is rolling to the left, and the crew doesn't know why.
Come on! God! I can't.
Captain Friedlein fights desperately to save his plane.
Come on!
No! No!
That's it. Oh, God.
It's no use. Investigators begin the painstaking task of sorting through the wreckage of Flight 2311. They're searching for any evidence that might hint at why the Embraer 120 rolled sharply to the left and crashed, killing everyone on board. Deep inside the propeller unit, investigators uncover an important clue.
Aha! There you are. We have a witness mark. Take a look.
There's a small mark where 2 parts of the propeller mechanism slammed together on impact. The witness mark might be enough to tell investigators how the propellers were operating. The marks tell Ritter the exact angle of the blades when the plane slammed into the ground.
These guys had a big problem with their left propeller. The blades were almost flat.
The left side propeller blades are at a dangerously low angle, one that is never used during flight. At 3 degrees, the blades are so flat they would act like a wall, blocking the flow of air the plane needs to maintain lift. Investigators study the mechanism used to control the left propeller.
Will you look at this?
They make a disturbing discovery.
It's completely worn down.
The teeth on a key piece of the gear mechanism, known as the quill, are almost entirely worn away. Investigators may finally have the lead they've been looking for.
This is what it's supposed to look like.
With its teeth worn away, the quill can't lock onto the gear system that controls the angle of the propeller blades. The discovery might explain why the propeller blades slipped to such a dangerously low angle.
Once we noticed that the quill teeth were severely worn, we started theorizing what would happen in that type of situation. And it was pretty clear that control of the propeller blade angles could be lost.
Ritter is certain he's found the critical clue: worn down teeth on the quill that could have allowed the propeller blades to slip to a dangerous angle. But he soon learns there's a big problem with his theory. The manufacturer says it's impossible. Engineers at Hamilton Standard included a fail-safe feature when they designed the propeller. It should be impossible for the blades to go flat during flight. If there's ever a problem with the mechanism controlling the angle, the blades are designed to move on their own to what's called the feathered position. A feathered propeller can't endanger the safety of the flight.
This has got to be it. This has to be connected somehow.
But Ritter isn't convinced by the manufacturer's assurances. His gut tells him the worn quill did allow the propeller blades to move to a dangerous angle. But without flight data, his investigation has hit a wall. He has no way to prove the quill brought down Flight 2311.
What's going on? Can you see anything? There's nothing.
It's 7:20 a.m. High above the jagged coast of Norway, the crew of Atlantic Airways 670 reaches the peak altitude for a short 15-minute flight. Next up is a quick stop on the island of Stord to pick up a few more before flying on to their final destination at Molde on the mainland coast. Stord Airport is perched on the edge of a rugged island with rocky cliffs bordering the runway on three sides. There's very little margin for error. Overshoot the runway and you could end up in the sea below. Shortly before touchdown, the crew makes a last-minute change. They want to approach Stord's single runway from the southern end, known as runway 33, rather than circling around to land from the north end, known as runway 15.
Control Atlantic 670.
We'd like to do a visual into runway 33.
Affirmative 670. The runway is free. You are cleared for a visual approach.
Runway 33.
The straight-in approach will put the airplane on the ground in less than 5 minutes.
What's our landing speed?
112 knots.
The crew now enters the busiest time in any flight.
Set speed for final.
They must simultaneously shed altitude and speed.
Speed set.
Flaps 20.
And prepare the plane for touchdown.
Flaps 20.
Gear down.
Gear is down.
Flaps to full.
Flaps full.
Flight 670 is just 1 minute from the runway.
Reducing thrust.
The plane touches down at 7:32 a.m.
And spoilers. No spoilers. We're not stopping. Speed!
Flight 670 is running out of runway. Desperate to stop his plane, Captain Yerhus takes drastic measures.
Hang on!
He throws the plane into a sharp turn, first right, then left, hoping to skid to a stop.
We're going over!
A local resident records the terrifying scene as aviation fuel burns out of control. It takes fire crews nearly 2 hours to quench the flames. 4 people are dead. Both pilots have survived, but it could have been much worse. Air traffic controllers at Stord Airport can't explain why Atlantic Airways Flight 670 careened over a cliff.
The other flight had no problem.
An identical plane landed safely on the same runway just 25 minutes before the crash. Sven-Erik Strandberg was piloting that plane.
It was not that wet, it was just a little bit damp, so we didn't notice very much on landing at all. So it was uneventful.
The idea that a wet runway was to blame just doesn't seem to add up.
You describe how the landing looked to you?
But investigators get a new lead when they talk to some of the firefighters who saw Flight 670 land. Several report seeing a trail of mist streaming from the plane's wings after it touched down.
The witnesses stated that they saw wing vortexes from the aircraft. For us, this is one evidence that the lift spoilers were not working as intended.
When an airplane is in flight, the wings create trails of turbulent air known as wingtip vortices, but only while the wings are generating lift.
In the air, you can actually see this like corkscrews following up from the wings.
The 146 has 6 spoilers that should have deployed on touchdown to disrupt that lift and help the plane stick to the runway and stop.
As soon as you select the spoilers, you will feel the airplane sink down towards the runway and you can apply the brakes.
Did the spoilers on Flight 670 somehow fail to deploy? It may be a difficult question for the team to answer. All 6 of the plane's spoilers were destroyed by fire. A United Nations transport plane, the Albertina, is on a vital mission in Central Africa.
Estimate of beam Andola at 2347. Arrival time 0020.
The destination is Ndola Airport in the British colony of Northern Rhodesia.
Roger. Ndola weather, wind 120 at 7 knots, visibility 5 to 10 miles with a slight smoke haze.
Controllers and local dignitaries anxiously await the arrival of one of the most important people in the world. On board the DC-6 is UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld.
At least they're willing to talk. What else do we know about their latest demands?
He's flying in from the Congo to hold high-level peace talks with the rebel leader. The flight left the Congolese capital, Leopoldville, a little more than 6 hours ago. For security reasons, it's flown an indirect route to Ndola. To prevent an ambush, no flight plan has been filed, and the pilots have maintained radio silence for most of the flight. The mission is a closely guarded secret.
Are you proceeding to Salisbury after Ndola?
Negative.
Even at this late stage, the crew needs to be secretive about the mission.
Are you staying in Ndola?
They don't know who might be listening in.
Negative.
Due to parking difficulties, would like to know your intentions.
We will give them on the ground.
Roger.
Go ask the pilots how much longer till we land.
The Secretary General and his delegation should be on the ground in about 10 minutes.
Your light's in sight. Overhead, Ndola. Descending.
Roger. Report reaching 6,000 feet.
Roger.
Okay, they're 10 minutes away.
Because of the unusual flight path, the plane now needs to fly past Ndola Airport and circle back to touch down on its only runway. The crew begins the final swooping left-hand turn that will line them up with the runway below. The mission to Ndola is about to begin. A mission that could change the fate of nations. Ground in Ndola, controllers are growing concerned.
Albertina, Ndola Tower, do you read?
The Secretary General's plane is overdue. The controller contacts other airports in the region.
Salisbury, Ndola Airport. Have you had any word from the UN Albertina?
Nothing at all.
Perhaps the Albertina's secret mission has taken it to a different destination at the last minute.
Lusaka, Ndola Airport. Have you had any contact with the UN flight?
Negative. No contact here.
The plane carrying one of the most important men on the planet is missing. It's a mystery that will haunt Ndola and the world for decades to come. Swedish air crash investigator Sven Hammarberg is entering a world of intrigue and deadly Cold War conspiracies. A special commission reporting to the UN needs him to determine whether a 1961 air disaster was an accident or an assassination.
The commission knew that I had some experience in that field of old aircraft accidents, so they called me.
In 2013, Sven Hammarberg joins a new search for the truth, gathering evidence to be presented to the United Nations.
My task was to look into the details and see if there were any new information available. And I was asked to evaluate the investigations that had been performed before. When I look into the basic facts around the crash, I look at the trees and the crash site and the statements over radio and so on.
Okay, now let's see the elevations.
He studies the terrain around Ndola Airport. He notes the height of the hills. He compares what he finds to what's shown on the chart used by the UN pilots. And he makes a shocking discovery.
There's a hill here, a hill here, a hill here, but there's nothing marked here. Here, where the crash site is.
The Ndola chart does not show any obstacle or higher ground west of the field. The crew might have been unaware of the height west of the field since there were no signs of it on the chart.
Hammarberg also discovers that members of the crew flying the Secretary General to high-level peace talks had been on duty for 17 of the past 24 hours.
Fatigue is an important factor here. The flight had lasted for 6.5 hours. And there are signs that some of the crew were quite exhausted even before the flight.
For Hammarberg, the clues are beginning to add up. He feels close to solving a 50-year-old aviation mystery that has generated heated controversy the world over. After carefully reviewing all the evidence surrounding the crash of the Albertina in 1961, Sven Hammarberg believes he now knows what went wrong in the final 3 minutes of flight. And it has nothing to do with murder.
Reaching the airfield and see the lights when you have been flying for 6.5 hours, I think it's very easy for a pilot to get thinking that, oh, we're here, we're just going to land.
Passing the airport, the pilots descend below the minimum safe altitude of 5,000 feet. As they turn back towards the runway, they suddenly lose sight of the runway lights.
You go into the dark, and then you completely miss your references.
The pilots don't realize that a hill is blocking their view because the hill isn't on their chart.
Losing the visual sight of the airport would cause the pilots to look even further and lose more altitude.
Before they even know they're in danger, it's too late.